Welcome to Inside the GMAT. I'm your host, Zach. If you've ever Googled how to study for the GMAT, you know the internet is full of advice. Some good, some questionable, and some is just plain overwhelming. But there's one recommendation you'll see again and again, and I'm happy to see it. Use GMAT Official Prep from GMAC. But that could be overwhelming too. That's why I'm joined again by the legendary Stacey Koprince from Manhattan Prep to help us crack open these official tools. We're going to break down how to get the most out of the newest GMAT official guide, when and how to use practice exams and practice questions, and yes, even what the limitations of these tools are and how to fill in those gaps. So let's get into it. Stacey, welcome back to the show.
I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. Why are official tools so important when preparing for the GMAT?
Because they're official. They're literally the real thing. So these questions have appeared on the GMAT in the past for real people taking the exam. What happens basically is the questions are used for some period of time and then they are retired. And then we get to have them as part of our prep. So literally nothing better than studying from the real thing.
Is it easy to overlook the importance of having those officially written materials?
I think so, because if you're not immersed, like if you're not essentially a professional, either question writer or test taker, you can't necessarily see the difference between something that the official test writers are writing and something that a test prep company like mine is writing. We absolutely do our best, of course, to mimic the real test questions when we're writing, but I have never seen a test prep company do as good of a job overall. We have some questions that are as good that could probably make the cut, but it's not the case that every single one of our questions, or frankly, any test prep company out there, would be good enough to be on the official test. By contrast, the official materials are literally all good enough to be on the official test because they were, by
Yeah,
definition.
there's nuance there, right?
There's definitely nuance there. I really think of this as like if you look at an author, at a songwriter, at a movie director, and you're a fan of their work, or a TV show creator, and you're a fan of their work, you can often see the connections between different books, different songs, different movies that they're doing because there's a signature that they're putting on it. There's a rhythm to it. There's a feel to the language. And so on test questions, the way that translates is there's a way in which they are constructing problems. They're setting up the logic of the problems, the rhythm to how they're writing to convey the information in the problems. That is unique to that person who's writing it. And so within the shadowy group of question writers for GMAC, nobody knows who they are. Um, they have this style, if you will, that the rest of us do try our best to mimic, but we're different people. You can't write exactly the same way. Not everyone's out there creating songs or creating et cetera exactly the same way, though they try to mimic all the time. So while we do our best, and I do think our best questions can probably stand toe to toe with GMAC's questions, it's not the case that all of our questions are that good. Where, by contrast, by definition, the official questions are all that good because they are literally all official questions.
Obviously, there are many high quality, extremely credible GMAT prep options available with very, very well written questions. Something that I wanted to ask you if you feel like it's a common mistake, which is relying on third party materials only and missing out on those nuanced official questions, or the reverse.
I think so. So I think it's a mistake in both ways. You actually need both types of sources for your studies. You do need official questions and official practice tests. You also do need some test prep materials, and each one's serving a different purpose. So the official questions, like I said, these are the real thing. They really appeared on the test in the past, so nothing better in terms of the quality of the questions and the test likeness of the questions. And for the practice exams, of course, the algorithm is also the same as the algorithm on the official test. So in terms of the scoring mechanism and how the test feels as you're taking it, there's nothing better than the real thing there as well. At the same time, the official practice questions and practice exams, they don't teach you how to get better at doing them. Actually, the official practice exams don't even have solutions. They'll tell you the correct answer, but there's not an explanation for how to do it. So that's where third-party materials come in on two fronts. One is just there are actually facts and rules and strategies and processes that you need to learn in order to answer questions on this test and to work efficiently. And so test prep companies are providing all of that learning, if you will. And then the how do you solve this in what I'm going to call like the quickest and dirtiest way? The GMAT is This is one of the reasons I love it, frankly, as a standardized test. So the GMAT is built to, yes, to test various facts and rules, and yes, it's a test, and yes, it has real stuff on it, but it's built for business school, which means the test makers are trying to understand how you think. They don't actually care that you use like the textbook, oh, write this equation and then write this other equation and then show me how you solved. You never have to show your work. What they care is, were you able to reason your way to the correct answer in an efficient way? Because this is business. We need to be able to work efficiently. We need to be able to spot the shortcuts or to realize, oh, I don't need to do that. That's too much work. And the GMAT itself is really built to reward that kind of studying and that kind of behavior. And so that kind of strategy also you're going to get from test prep companies.
Like I mentioned at the top, we just released at GMAC the new official guide, the 2025-2026. And I want to open that guide with you today, not physically. I left my copy in the office, but to really get an overview of what is inside the book.
So the book is fantastic. It has more than 1,000 questions total. And I'll say there's the physical book and then there's online resources that come with it. And that's an important caveat because there are actually a couple of question types on the GMAT that are so complex, the way that they play out, that you literally can't print them in a book. You can only do them on screen or online. So there's these online resources that come with it for some of the question types. But the book covers all 8 of the question types that are on the exam. You have tons of practice questions for all of them. And then there is also an online resource associated with it so that all of the questions, both the ones that are printed in the book and the ones that are online only, are in this online tool that you can access through, your web browser, through your computer. And you can use that to set up problem sets, for example, when you're to that point of wanting to do a timed set instead of just doing individual problems to improve your skills. So yeah, it's got everything that you need. It crosses the full spectrum, and it does actually give you that ability to see it in a test-like way when you go and use the online access for it as well.
It's definitely what I like to call one of our flagship prep products, and what makes the official guide and there's the official guide, which covers all 3 sections. And then there's 3 other books, which cover the different sections. And they all actually have the answer explanations,
Yes.
which I think is probably one of the best value propositions of the official guide.
Yes, for sure. Basically the big official guide is the one that we use in our programs. And like, I wouldn't even consider, regardless of whether you're studying with us or not, do not consider getting ready for the GMAT without at a minimum the big official guide that has all the question types in it. Yeah, don't even think about not using it.
So what is your advice for working through that big book?
Yeah. So as you're going through that, the way that the book is organized is it's organized first by question type. So problem solving, for example, is one question type. Critical reasoning is another question type. So they're in their own separate like sections or chapters. And then the questions are organized, roughly speaking, from easier to harder. So the first third-ish are on the easier side, and then more medium questions, and then harder questions. But they are what I'll call like mixed up in terms of the topic or the logic or whatever it is that they're testing. So for example, if you're in the problem solving chapter, it's not the case that like all the algebra questions are clustered together. It's the case that they're organized by the difficulty. And so you might have an algebra question, and then the next question might be a ratio question, and then the next question might be a probability question, something like that. And so you wouldn't want to just like pick up the book and start working through every question in order. So this is where we come to the other piece of it, which is for a lot of the tests, there are actual facts and rules that you need to learn. Like, can you answer a probability question? Do you remember how to do probability? Or do you need to go study that first before you can try this question? So usually it's the case that people are coming in at the beginning, of course, not remembering all of that stuff from high school math. In some cases, it's actually middle school math. And so you need to do some work first to relearn that stuff before you're ready to go try those questions. And so basically the path that I would recommend there is that you're going and you're going to go learn a chunk of stuff. So let's say you decide that you first want to study algebra. So you're going to go and remind yourself how to do linear equations and how to translate words into equations to be able to solve, and what quadratic equations are and what are my exponent rules and whatever. You're going to go learn this stuff. And then you're going to go and you're going to try some just individual practice problems. Like, let's say I just studied my exponent rules, and now I want to make sure that I understood them well enough that I could actually answer questions. The first thing I recommend trying that on is actually not official guide questions. So don't use official guide questions yet, because they're a precious resource. So the first thing you do is you go try your exponent skills on a couple of test prep company practice questions. This is also where you're getting the exponent rules themselves from. So you're in that little ecosystem. And then you go, okay, great. I think I've got it. Now I really want to test myself and like, see, I think I've mastered this little group of things. And so then you're going to go and you're going to find an exponent question in the book and set your timer and you're going to try it and see how well you do or whether there's still more that you need to go back and study from in that material. In a perfect world, this would all be already integrated for you so that whatever you're doing in the first place tells you, okay, now go try these couple of questions. But you certainly can do that for yourself if whatever you're using to study doesn't already integrate the two.
So it's sort of like using these official materials as a proving ground.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. So I'm going to get geeky here a little bit, but like learning science basically shows that testing like you learn something and you want to test yourself and I'm going to call it quizzing because test makes it sound like this big test. It's not taking the whole test, but frequent quizzing actually really helps our brains to cement the stuff that we're learning. And so you want to learn something and immediately try to put it into practice is that idea. And then there's the levels of practice are like, okay, I learned this rule. Do I have the rule, the little skill drill? Okay, I learned several rules, skill drill, got it. Okay, now let's go put it into the real practice, I'm going to call it, which is that bigger quiz of an official question.
Sure. So sticking with the example of studying exponents, let's say that you're working with Manhattan Prep, and you should, of course, and you're trying a bunch of exponents questions. And then you go to the OG, prove that you have a really strong handle on these questions. Where do you identify your weaknesses?
So yeah, it could be at any stage of the games. The first step when you're doing let's call them skill drills and then quizzes and then practice tests is kind of like a scaffolding for talking about quizzing yourself or testing yourself. At the skill drill level, it's really like, did I learn the facts and rules or the strategy or the process or approach or whatever it might be that I was just trying to study? And so you could fall down there and then realize, okay, I need to go back to the source materials. Maybe if it's exponent rules, maybe I need to make some flashcards and go drill them for a day to help myself remember what the rules are. Or maybe I know what the rules are, but when I try to actually do them on paper, I'm getting tangled up and I'm not as efficient as I need to be. And so I just need to go do some more just hardcore drills of making sure that I understand the mechanics of how to manipulate exponents. The next level up, which is the quiz level or the OG level, have we said already that OG is official guide? OG is official guide. So at the OG level, you're bringing in not just the facts and the rules that you needed to learn, but also, okay, how are they presenting the question? How am I reading the question? I've now got this time limit. On average, we have about 2 minutes per question on the test. So can I do this and can I execute all the moving parts of this problem within the time limit? That can create issues. It might be that you know the rules, but then when you read the question, there's something about the question that led you astray. So one of the things that you'll see in official questions, not always, but certainly as the questions get harder, is that information will be presented that is correct and generally clear. Like there is only one valid way to interpret it, but there are also little traps set up for you if you're not paying good enough attention. And again, this is very similar to the way things work in the real world. In the working world, nobody comes up to you and is like, here's the exact information that you need in the exact order that you need it with absolutely no ambiguity whatsoever. It just doesn't work that way in the real world. And so the test is built the same way to see, can you actually avoid the little distracting flags that are going around and stick to, okay, this is what it actually says, this is what it actually gave me, and this is what it's asking me to do. And so any of those could be areas where you fall into a trap or you get distracted by something, or your scratch paper wasn't clean enough and that caused a careless mistake or something like that. So all of those are opportunities to learn to get better as well. And then the final step when you're ready is to go take a practice test. And that's just everything you've already done, but in a much bigger scale. You're seeing everything. You're there for 2 hours and 15 minutes, right? And now there are lots of opportunities within that to figure out your weaknesses and how to push them higher for next time.
When you're exploring your weaknesses, obviously that involves looking at some answer explanations. What do you think is most important to look for when you're reviewing those explanations?
So that's a great question. The most important thing to do, I'm going to say, you asked me what to look for. I'm changing your question deliberately. This is important. What I don't want you to do is just read through the explanation. And that sounds weird because it's an explanation. Shouldn't you just read the explanation? No. In fact, the explanation is the equivalent of me being like, oh, you didn't know how to do that problem? Here, let me tell you how to do it. But you haven't learned how to do it yourself. You've just listened to me tell you how to do it or tell you how I would do it. That might make, in the moment, you might be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then 2 days from now, you might be like, wait, what was that again? We've all had this experience where you read something and you read an explanation of something and you thought, yeah, that makes sense. Got it. And then literally 2 or 3 days later, you have no idea and you wouldn't be able to replicate it. So I really encourage everybody, and this is what I do too, to use explanations essentially as like It's like you have your own private tutor who's going to give you some hints, but they're not going to give you the whole thing. The best tutors are not just going to tell you how to do it. They're going to give you a hint when you get stuck, but they're going to make you go figure out the next step and the next step and the next step. Because the more you can figure out, the more you'll actually remember that and be able to use it on the test. So you go to the explanation and you go, okay, how far did I get? Where did I get stuck? Go just look at that part and see how to get yourself unstuck. But then set the explanation aside and try to push that forward as far as you can. You get stuck again? Okay, go back to the explanation and look for the next way to get unstuck. But as much as possible, really try to push that and figure it out for yourself, because that will stick in your brain much, much better.
Should you be looking at answer explanations for questions that you got correct as well?
Yes, you should. That's a great question. So there's a couple of things going on here. So first of all, when you finish a problem, the first thing I want you to just ask yourself is, how confident do I feel on this question? If you're like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I think I got it right. Okay, the next thing you're going to do is go look at the correct answer letter. Are you right that you got it right? You might not be. That's number one. Next, let's say you did get it right. Did you legitimately get it right, or did you get lucky? You don't know that for sure until you go look at the answer explanation just to make sure. If you got lucky, that's not replicable. You're going to get it wrong most likely when you get to the test. And then let's say you got it right and it was legit. You didn't just get lucky. Did you do it in the most efficient way possible? Did you save the most brain power and the most time as possible? You might not have. And so there may be something in the explanation that can actually help you to learn to do this faster, easier, better. And that's important on a timed test.
So what are some tips on tracking your progress when you're going through all of these different phases of studying, quizzing, reviewing answer explanations? I'm not even studying for the GMAT, and I'm trying to think about how I would organize myself.
Yeah. And I think this is why a lot of people do end up using a program from a test prep company where they don't have to think about how to organize it, where somebody's basically put that organization together for them. That's obviously more expensive than studying on your own. You can do it either way. But yes, that's part of what you're getting if you do pay for a program that somebody else has put together. Generally speaking, you want to start with a practice test so that you know your starting point. And that feels really scary because you haven't studied yet. So why would you take a practice test now? But you actually do want to start with a practice test really early in your studies so that you can see what your strengths and weaknesses are. You can also see what your starting score is. And you want to go do a little bit of research for your target school so that you can see what kind of scores they are publishing as their average score so that you can get an idea of what you want your target or your goal score to be. It gives you something to work against. You're not trying to learn everything that could possibly be tested on the GMAT. You're trying to get a score that's going to be good enough for the programs that you want to go to, and that's it. And so you start with that, and then as you're going, you're really using that information between that practice test and the next practice test to drive your studies, to know what are the things that I want to focus on for the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks until I take another practice test. And that's probably early on in your studies about the interval that you want, maybe 3 to 4 weeks before you go take another practice test. And you're not trying to learn everything in that 3 to 4 weeks before you get to your next practice test. You're going to choose your battles. You're going to choose your priorities for that period of time and go and tackle those things. And then within that little cycle until your next practice test, we do recommend keeping what we call a review log. We used to call it an error log. We changed the name to review log for the same reason the question that you asked, Zach. It shouldn't just be the ones you got wrong that are in your error log. It should actually include the things that you got right. And what you're doing is you're just keeping a little log of everything. And you're not trying, this could quickly become overwhelming, and you could be spending more time on your log than anything else. So it's not about that, but you're just logging did I get it right or did I get it wrong? How much time did I spend? Is this something that I want to come back and look at it again? Or do I feel good with this? And you want to write down a takeaway. And the best takeaways are in the form, when I see X, I'm going to do Y. It's like an action takeaway. So this is the clue that I need to recognize or notice next time. And then this is the action that I'm going to take when I see that same clue again. So this could be, and this works for whether you got the question right or wrong. Because if you got it right, you want to reinforce, oh yeah, I chose to answer this question using this particular strategy, and that worked, and I want to do the same thing next time. So my takeaway is, well, when I see a problem with characteristics A, B, and C, I'm going to use solution method X to solve it, just like I did this time. Versus obviously if you got something wrong, then there's something you want to improve there, and there might be 2 or 3 takeaways that you're pulling out from there. And so you're basically just consolidating, if you will, this learning that you're doing into this little log at the end of a study session that's these are the major things that I'm trying to do next time, and here's how I'm going to recognize when I want to do those things. And then those are basically helping you by reviewing those as you're going between practice tests. Those are helping you to continually be oh yeah, I still have to do a little more work on this, or yeah, I need to lift that, or hey, I identified exponents as a weakness in my last practice test, and I'm getting there. I'm doing these now. I'm feeling a lot more comfortable and confident and quick. And so now I'm going to move on to something else.
Got it. And on this review log, what role does goal setting play in this organization? And I want to actually echo something that you said just a bit ago about you're really just aiming for the score to get into the program that you want to get into. And I think that's really important because growing up, going to school, you're always trying to get an A plus. But that's actually not the approach to a high stakes exam like this.
No, and I would say not for the GMAT. Maybe that's the case if you're, taking your medical board exams or the bar exam. I would hope so that you're trying to get everything right
Sure.
because that's a different kind of test. This test is for business. It's for business school. But in the business world, and in fact, it's costly and inefficient to try to get to the A+ level on absolutely everything that you're doing. You can't do it all. You will rapidly run out of money, or not get enough done, and your business will suffer if you're trying to get to that level on absolutely everything that you're doing. So yeah, you're setting your priorities, but then you're setting your goals, you're setting your priorities, and then that's what you're aiming towards. You're not trying to learn every last thing or do every last thing and get the perfect score. This will be true in business school, by the way, too. You're going to get inundated with work in business school. You are going to have to set priorities and decide which things are going to get which levels of effort, and not everything is going to get 100%. And I think one of the things that we try to instill in our students from day one is don't approach this the way that you approached school tests. This is not a textbook exam. This is not a school undergrad or high school or whatever exam. That's not the purpose of the exam. It's not the goal of the exam. Obviously, yes, you want to get a good score and you want to get a high enough score for the programs that you're looking to apply to. But because this is an adaptive exam, something we haven't talked about yet, but the exam is adapting to you as you go, the exam is going to feel hard for everybody. Everybody's going to get questions wrong. It's just the way that the test works. That's okay. It's just like in the real world, you can't succeed at everything. You're going to have some, product launches that don't do as well, or marketing campaigns that don't do as well, or whatever. That's okay. It all balances out in the end. You just have to have good enough for the level that you're trying to reach. And so you're doing that within your studies. I realized you asked me another question, Zach, before that I didn't fully answer. You were like, how do we set goals? So you're setting that goal at the beginning based on the programs that you want to go to. And then you're having cycles essentially every start at the beginning, like maybe every 3 to 4 weeks, you're taking a practice test, and those will get closer together as you get towards the end of your studies. You're using that to gauge as you go, okay, first of all, just is my score going up? Like, am I actually making progress and getting closer to my goal? And then really diving into the data from the latest practice test to see what's my lowest hanging fruit? What are the things that are my best opportunity to improve in the next 3 to 4 weeks before I take my next practice test? And ultimately what you'll find is by the time you're, at the end of your studies and you're ready to go take the test, you will still have weaknesses. You will still have things on your list that you could go improve if you wanted to. But you're not going to need to because you're already at the score that you want to get. Like I've taken this test multiple times. I've scored in the 99th percentile multiple times. I still have my weaknesses, but it doesn't matter. Well, it doesn't matter to me because I teach this stuff. But if I were just going to business school, it doesn't matter because once you have the score that you need, you're done. It doesn't matter if there are other things that you're still weak on.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful for people who are listening to hear. And then you mentioned the algorithm, the adaptive algorithm of the GMAT. I think that's a really great segue to talk about what else is available that's official other than the official guide or the OG, which is, of course, the official practice exams. Now, we offer 2 free practice exams for anybody who goes to MBA.com, but we also have 4 additional practice exams. And on top of that, we have practice questions. And what do you make of those?
Yeah, so the practice exams, again, I would classify as you must use these as part of your prep. In fact, for both the big official guide and all of the practice exams, we buy these from you and give them to all of our students and incorporate them into our programs because we think they're that important. The other thing I'll add is, so that's 6 exams total. There's the 2 free and the 4 paid that Zach mentioned, but they can all be taken twice without question repeats. So really you have 12 practice exams out of that set of 6 exams. These are the real test questions, and they're the same algorithm that's used when you go in and take the real test. And it's the same scoring scale. And obviously they, unlike test prep companies, although we again try to mimic this, like it's the real thing. So you really are getting an accurate read of what level your score is at. So that's why we use those practice tests in our programs to gauge our own students' levels. Again, don't even consider getting ready for this test without using the official practice test. The official practice questions tool. So there you've got 3 different like groups of banks of questions, one for each section of the exam, or you can just get it as a bundle and use them all together. If you want additional official practice, then that's the next good source after using the official guide material. Just in terms of the like cost per question, your most cost effective is going to be to go get that big official guide in terms of the number of questions you're getting for the cost. So I'd start there and then move on if you want more. The one thing I will mention is the explanations in the official guide or the official practice questions tool. They are completely correct. They're not always the quickest and dirtiest way to get there. They're not always the easiest way and the best way, in my opinion, to get to the correct answer. They're like we actually also, although we buy the big OG for all of our students and to have them do the questions, we actually also write our own solutions for all of those. So they're using your questions and our solutions, our students, because I feel like that really encapsulates what GMAC does best and what test prep companies do best, right? Your questions are the best, but then our explanations are the best. So put those 2 together and we've got the perfect study materials.
Actually, let's get into that. Like, what else could somebody expect to learn or benefit from in general? Working with Manhattan Prep, of course, is what you can speak to the most, but perhaps other test prep organizations as well.
Yeah, with test prep materials in general. So there's a couple of different levels of things that can be valuable as people are getting ready to take the tests. We talked about one a little bit already, which is just the idea of the organization of it and the, do I put together my own program by, plucking different resources from different companies, the official stuff, as well as different test prep companies and kind of organize it all myself? Or do I just work with one test prep company and do like a program, like a complete program where everything's already laid out for me and I just have to do the work that's in front of me? Advantages and disadvantages to both. The big difference is probably cost versus time, as so many things are in life. So if you want to put together your own program, you will save money. You won't pay as much money, but you will spend more of your time just actually organizing your program. On the other hand, if you want someone else to do that organization and structure for you, then you're going to pay more money for that luxury, right? So that's one level. The next level, which also we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, is just there's facts and rules you need to learn. There's strategies you need to learn. A lot of the question types, particularly in the data insight section, are really intricate. If you've never seen those question types before, you're going to have no idea like even where to start. And then there are processes and strategies that you can use to get through them more quickly. There are also things like when can you estimate? How heavily can you estimate? How do you know how heavily you can estimate, depending on the problem that you're looking at? Or what are other strategies that you can use? Like sometimes they'll give you an algebraic problem, but you can actually just plug real numbers into it and turn it into arithmetic. And pretty much everybody on the planet is better at arithmetic than they are at algebra by definition. So that's another way to simplify a problem and get there. There on the new version of the GMAT, there are more logic-based questions than were on the older version of the exam. Logic-based questions can get kind of intricate, and there are strategies you can use to help in terms of like notation when they're tossing a bunch of rules at you, and how do I note these down in a way that allows me then to figure out the logic of, this person had to sit in this chair and this person was 2 chairs away from them, and figuring out the logic of placement or whatever. So all of those kinds of things, from pure facts and rules, things you would have learned in school, to strategies for how to approach something and how to do something efficiently, that's all going to come from test prep materials in one form or another. That's whether you choose to kind of make your own program or whether you choose to just use a program that a company has already devised for you. And then within programs, you can choose to do like on-demand or async programs where you're mostly learning from videos. You're not interacting live with an instructor. But then there are also like classes or tutors if you want to do something. And then those, of course, again, it's going to be more engagement, but more expensive than the more async types of study programs.
I'm glad all these options exist because obviously there's so many different types of learners. When I was studying for the GMAT, I didn't have a lot of money, but I knew I needed to spend the money on a live classroom in-person experience because I'm the kind of learner who just needs that kind of accountability. That's just me. I know I'm not alone.
I see that all the time with my students. I would say like at least half of my students in my live classes, yeah, they're looking for the accountability. And also, by the way, they set up study groups with their fellow classmates. I basically give everybody time in our second class session I let them go into breakout rooms and, get to know each other and then go ahead and exchange contact information if they want to set up study groups outside of class. If you've got somebody who's not just going through this, but who's also using the same materials or the same program as you are, like that's the perfect study buddy to get ready for the test.
How do you recommend students incorporate the official materials into their test prep program?
Yeah. So if you're using a program that's been designed in a perfect world, that program would already incorporate. I mentioned earlier that we already use the official guide and the official practice exams as part of our program and just give them to our students. So in a perfect world, if you'd already have that incorporated, you wouldn't need to worry about it. But of course, you may decide to use a program that doesn't already have incorporated, totally fine. And then you can go ahead and do that incorporation yourself. So first, you just go and buy the materials at mba.com. For the practice questions, what you're looking to do is, we talked about this a little bit earlier on, you're looking to earlier when you're first learning something, you're not using the official practice questions yet. You're first making sure that you really learned the material, you feel good with the material and mastered the material before you go use up an official question and testing yourself on that material. It'll be a little bit harder because you're not using a program that's already told you. So you need to go find an exponent's problem as opposed to somebody just telling you, hey, do problem 32 on page whatever. So there will be a little bit more work there in terms of going and finding problems that then match whatever it was that you just studied. Generally speaking, what I also recommend there is, I mentioned earlier that in the official guide, it's by difficulty level. So the earlier questions in a chapter are easier and then they get harder as you go through that chapter. So ditto, you'd want to incorporate that as you're choosing questions, where earlier in your studies, you're starting with the easier to medium level questions, and then you're moving on to the more advanced ones as you get deeper into your studies in any particular area. And then for the practice exams, if the program that you're using uses these practice exams, again, they'll just tell you when to take them, when to use them. If the program that you're using doesn't use these practice exams, I would still follow the rough schedule that I was talking about and just see whether the program that you're using already has practice exams in those places. And if not, then substitute in an official exam in those places. So I would still take a practice exam very early on, beginning of studies, to see what your starting point is and what your strengths and weaknesses are. And then in the first part of your studies, every 4-ish weeks, every month roughly, this is the phase while you're still learning everything for the first time, all the different question types and all the content areas and strategies. And then once you get to the point where you've learned everything for the first time and you're now going, okay, I want to lift my score further. So what do I need to go back and get better at? At that point, you might start to do shorter study cycles between exams where you take an exam and you might only study for a couple of weeks based on the weaknesses that came out of that particular exam, and then go take another exam and kind of repeat that cycle as you're getting towards the end.
When you're choosing questions to practice, particularly later in your prep journey, what's the role that those harder, more advanced questions play?
Yeah, there's an interesting issue here because the GMAT is adaptive. And so it's choosing your difficulties for you based on your performance as you go through the test. And a lot of times we'll see people. I was just talking to one of my fellow instructors last night, and he's like, I'm struggling with this tutoring student because he only wants to do the hardest questions, but he's making mistakes on questions that are below that. He's making careless mistakes. And he's just dismissing it. It's like, oh, but it's just a careless mistake. I know how to do it. Well, on an adaptive test, if you make too many careless mistakes, you're never going to lift to the hardest questions. So you're literally wasting your time if that's your focus and you're not going and figuring out how not to make those careless mistakes. So you really do want to think about this as, you don't need to get the hardest questions right in order to get a great score. You do, however, need to not miss the easier questions in order to get a great score. You can get away with a careless mistake here and there, but if you're making too many careless mistakes, you literally are not going to lift your score to the highest levels if that's the kind of score that you're looking for. So on this test, it's just as important to continue to get better at, let's call the easy, medium, hard spectrum relative to any individual. So let's say that medium for you is the stuff that you can do right now where you do need generally the full time, but you can then generally get it right. And easier means you can do it faster. And you very rarely make mistakes. And harder means either it's going to take you longer or you're not going to get those right. As you get better, the questions that used to be like your medium level, like these questions are in my wheelhouse right now, right? as you lift your score, those questions actually start to become your easier questions. So those questions that were in your wheelhouse before that were like, right, like I can do this, but I do need the whole 2 minutes. I actually have to be able to get them right faster, because as I improve, those become my baseline, my easier ones. And now I'm getting these ones that used to be my hard ones are now my medium ones. And then I've got all these other ones I didn't even see before that are my hard ones, right? And so like I actually have to get better at the lower level for me ones, the bottom half ones, because if I can't do those more efficiently, then I'm literally not going to even have time to address the even harder ones that I'm now seeing as I lift my score on the test. So that's a really weird thing that most people are not aware of or not prepped for when they're taking the exam. Don't just focus on the hardest stuff. You actually do need to continue to get better at the stuff that you already know how to do, get faster, more efficient, fewer mistakes on what you can already do. I'll bring that back to, by the way, real life, real world. You work in some area of business. You have to keep getting better and faster at what you've already mastered so that allows you to move up higher, take on more responsibilities, move up the food chain and, your corporate whatever. So it's the same thing.
As you progress in your prep, do you go section by section? Or when do you start mixing the sections together in your practice sets?
Yes, that's a great question. It's because the real test, of course, is going to mix things up. So the real test isn't going to be like, here's 3 algebra questions in a row. It's just going to all be tossed at you. However, so when you're first learning any new question type, any new content area, something that's new for you, that's when you're just doing like a couple of questions to make sure that you really learned. You're quizzing yourself to make sure you really learned. But you're going to move on from there pretty quickly and not just like do all the exponent questions. You're going to move on from there and then do roots and then do quadratic equations and learn all this other stuff. And then you're going to start to put it together into smaller sets of questions. So not the length of a practice exam, but 4 questions, 8 questions, something like that, where you're doing little time sets of things. And as you go through your studies, you want to build those not just on whatever you've studied this week. You want to include anything that you've studied so far. So for example, what we do in our programs is starting about a third of the way through the program, we're giving you not just those little like, okay, I just taught you this and now do these couple of questions to test that. We start to give you what we call mixed time sets about a third of the way through. And any mixed time set can cover anything that's been given so far in the program. So you're constantly doing that review, but you're also practicing under these really test-like conditions where anything could be coming. And you have to be able to look at it and recognize it and then decide goes back to the when I see X, I'm going to do Y method of coming up with your takeaways, because that's how it is in the test. Just things are popping at you. You got to be able to recognize. So how are you going to recognize it? And then you got to know, okay, what do I want to do when I see that thing? So most of your OG questions, you're really going to use in that format a bit later in your studies as you start to do mixed time sets and really try to mimic the real test conditions as much as possible.
Should students be exhausting every free resource that's available?
They should certainly be checking out every free resource that's available. Should they be exhausting it? No, for 2 reasons. First of all, some free resources are higher quality than others. If you check out a free resource and you're like, this doesn't feel very high quality to me, then why would you exhaust it? Just let it go for obvious reasons, right? And the other thing I'll just say is like everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses and their own goal score. So everybody needs a slightly different path to get to what they need for their goal score. You may find that the free resources line up very nicely with exactly what you need. You may also find that it's only partially a good overlap. And there are things of the free resources that you don't really need, but there are other things that you would need to pay for that you actually do need to help push your score. So it's a balance there. But certainly where I would start is by going and looking at free resources, of course, because they're free, and then get the most that you can out of them for what you need for your strengths and weaknesses.
Okay, Stacey, as we wrap up, what are your top 3 to 5 pro tips for using all of these prep tools efficiently?
For official materials, you're always going to use the questions under test conditions the first time that you try them. Test conditions mean you're going to time yourself. If you're doing a single question, then it's 2 or 2.5 minutes, depending on the particular question type. If you're doing a block of questions, then you set up the appropriate timer for how long that question block is. But practice that timing, practice that decision making. That's a core part of how you actually solve these things on test day. So under test conditions, the first time you're using any official materials. Also for your official guide or other official practice questions, save those for when you feel like you've mastered something and now you really want to test yourself under those test conditions. Don't go straight there first. Use other skill drills, test prep company skill drills or whatever to make sure that you've actually learned the skills, learned the facts and rules and strategies. And finally, don't take more than 1 practice exam in a week. When we talked earlier about some timeframes in which to take practice exams, but there is also such a thing as taking practice exams too close together. If you take an exam and you bomb it, you messed up your timing, or you had a bad day, you were really tired from work that day or whatever, it's really tempting to just be like, oh, I'll take another practice exam tomorrow. Don't, because you already have good data. If you were too tired, if you messed up your timing, whatever, something led to whatever mistakes you made and whatever questions you missed. And that's still indicating really good information about weaknesses that you have. So go do something about those before you go take another practice test. All right. So no practice tests within a week of each other.
Stacey, thank you so much for coming back.
My pleasure. It's always fun to talk to you and to talk about the GMAT.
Of course, it's always fun to talk about the GMAT, but not as fun as taking the GMAT. So if you are preparing to take the test, of course, you can access any of the official materials that we talked about on this podcast at mba.com/prep. And if you'd like to take advantage of a test prep program, such as the one offered by Manhattan Prep, you can go to manhattanprep.com and explore all of the offerings there. Happy prepping, and thank you so much for listening. Until next time.